things, they're likely to give advantage of other things.
So thank you all. Thank you all for joining the Receiving the Offer workshop. My name is Jessica Hernandez, and I lead the early career and emerging talent team at Airbnb. Before we get started, we'd love to hear from all of you who is logging in. So if you haven't already, please drop into the chat your name, location, and what's your favorite podcast. A few housekeeping items to address. So we ask that you please keep your mics muted throughout the presentation, and you're more than welcome to drop a question in the chat, and I'll be happy to address it live to Layne. We also have a Q&A portion at the towards the end of the session. As a reminder, this session is meant to be as interactive as possible, so we welcome all forms of engagement, so feel free to react with emojis, comments, questions in the chat. And all of our sessions will be recorded and posted on our talent board website. And so with that, let's get things started. Layne, I'll pass the mic over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jessica. I am going to get my screen shared, so just give me 1 sec here. All right, can you all see? I'm going to take that as a yes, and we'll go ahead and get started. Again, just like Jessica said, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very interactive workshop, so I'm going to be keeping my eye on the chat here. We'll also have some breakout rooms and chances for interaction, so please feel free to roll up your sleeves and join us in our discussion today. All right, so this is a workshop called I Got the Offer. Now what? I'm sure some of you have been in this situation or will be very soon, but very quickly to introduce myself, my name is Layne. I'm an emerging talent recruiter at Netflix, and I work with the One Rec community, which is also the umbrella organization for Talent Board, and I help facilitate our community circles. So Google that if you want to check it out. And then, as I said in the chat, I'm a huge fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. It's not a Layne presentation without a GIF of RuPaul somewhere there. All right, so for the agenda, we'll be covering 4 primary topics today. First is demystifying the offer process. Some of you know what it feels like to receive an offer as a candidate, but might not know what's going on the back end. So I wanted to share with you what recruiters are up to, what hiring managers are up to during that time. We'll also do a pretty deep dive into negotiations. So some principles of negotiation that you should keep in mind. We'll be doing that workshop that I mentioned. We'll be breaking you out into breakout rooms to practice some negotiation skills. And we'll be also doing a very brief personality assessment so that you can learn how to cater your negotiation style to your personality and some personalities of folks that you'll likely encounter throughout your career. I have some advice on timing and how to manage timing when it comes to offers, and then some tips for your post-offer experience. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. All right, so first off, demystifying the offer process. So first, we'll talk through the steps that you probably go through when you receive an offer. First, your interviews are over. We're all happy. You did it. Hopefully, you're taking some time to relax. Usually what happens is after your interviews are over, your recruiter will reach out for a phone call. Sometimes they'll tell you, yes, you've got the offer and we want to talk, or sometimes they like to leave that to the actual phone call. Usually it depends on the recruiter's personal style, but they'll get in touch with you, and likely at this point, they will give you your verbal offer. The reason we tend to do a verbal offer before a written offer is so that we can answer any quick questions that come up while you talk through the details of the offer. And then we'll also get ahead of maybe some sticking points, some areas of the offer that the candidate might want to negotiate. It's much easier to address those live and on the phone than it might be later when you have to process an offer a few different times. After you get the offer, we hope that you celebrate a little bit. you'll review the offer with some trusted advisors. I notice this happens pretty frequently with students working with their career centers or other advisors, mentors, parents. Then you'll likely receive the written offer a little bit after you receive the verbal offer. This timeline really varies by company that you work with. Right now, in my role at Netflix, we usually get that written offer turned around in about an hour after the verbal offer, but some companies have more of a formal process. Maybe that offer will come your way a few days later. And then after you receive the written offer, you usually have a timeline that you agree upon with your recruiter, and you'll accept or decline the offer within that timeline. So hopefully this is a process you all have, you're familiar with. Actually, I'm curious if you could drop it in the chat if anyone here has experienced a formal offer process. Feel free to just write like me or thumbs up in the chat. And then the recruiter point of view. So here's what's happening. Cool, Rishi's gotten through to an offer. Cool. Recruiter point of view here. So what's going to happen is the recruiter and the hiring manager have been working close together to get all of our candidates through the offer process. At the end of the process, once everyone's been interviewed, the manager and the recruiter will meet. They'll get feedback from anyone else included in the interview process, and they'll select a candidate that they want to hire. At this point, it's highly likely that they'll also have some alternate candidates identified. Maybe there's 3 candidates that the team would be perfectly happy to hire, but they sort of ranked them and went, you know, this is the candidate we want to give an offer to. If they declined, we'll go to the second candidate. This is an important note when it comes to timing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I know it's a little bit awkward, and I feel like I'm sort of like exposing recruiters and saying that we rank and we have alternates, but it's an important thing to consider when we are going through our timing exercise a little bit later in our presentation, and why we make some of the decisions that we do, and why we might put some timelines on decisions for offers. So again, usually there's a ranking of alternates identified. The recruiter and the hiring manager, probably the finance team, the mobility team, will align on the offer package. So they decide what salary that will extend. We'll decide if we can offer relocation or if it's necessary, and any other bonuses and benefits that we want to offer. We'll make sure we're all on the same page there. Then at this stage, the recruiter will extend the verbal offer. So again, the purpose here is to inform the candidate of all the details of the offer. We also want to do a quick pulse check on your enthusiasm. Does this candidate feel really likely to accept? Are they a little bit lukewarm, maybe not likely to accept? Again, this can dictate how we manage the rest of the candidate pipeline. This is where we'll also understand potential sticking points. Maybe the candidate's really unhappy with the relocation package, or maybe they don't want to move to the location that this offer is for. This is a great opportunity to start that conversation. The recruiter and the candidate will also agree on a timeline, say, okay, I'm going to get you your written offer within an hour. And then from there, you have 2 weeks to accept or decline. That's just an example of maybe a timeline that the two would agree upon. And then potential, what did I mean by this? I think I mean potential for a written offer. So this is where we key up all of the details that's going to be on the written offer. From there, we'll translate all of that stuff we talked about in the verbal offer to the written offer and extend it to the candidates. From there, the candidate accepts or declines the offer. Hopefully it's an accept, but if it's a decline, we will reach out to our alternate candidates and start that process over again, or we'll decline everybody and move forward with the candidate that accepts. So a lot of you are here to learn about negotiation and how negotiations tend to happen. Timing here is pretty important. There's a pretty specific window where it is appropriate to negotiate an offer, and I've highlighted it here. It's usually around the verbal offer and maybe before the written offer. Sometimes it's around that time. I realize some candidates might not be in a position to actively negotiate at the point of the verbal offer. In fact, it's pretty normal when I'm on the recruiting side of things to get the information to the candidate, say, here's your verbal offer. We all go, yes, 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 so great. Hang up the phone, and then the candidate might reach back out a little bit later and say, hey, I've been thinking, and here's some things that I want to negotiate on the offer. That's totally fine and totally normal. And it's within that window of negotiation highlighted here. So let's dig in. Let's talk about negotiations. So most of you are students, I believe almost all of you are students. And I want to mention that there's a particular flavor of negotiation when it comes to university recruiting. And there's a few reasons why. The first reason is standardized offers are more common for university recruiting, specifically for internships. It's highly likely that we hire interns in more or less of a programmatic structure, which means every candidate within a certain discipline or a certain year of university will receive the exact same offer as everybody else. This is because we want to maintain equity in our process. This is also because we can't assume that intern candidates are going to have a wide variety of experiences or skills at this stage in their career. As you progress in your career and you get a bunch of different experiences and develop more knowledge, there is going to be a wider variety in the types of offer packages you can negotiate for, because there's less of a clear-cut expectation on what skills you have. But when you're relatively early in your career, you're a student, maybe a junior, we can expect that baseline is going to be more or less the same for everyone else in that candidate pool. We also don't expect a lot of negotiations for university candidates. And so that standardization is great for equity and making sure everyone gets the same pay at this stage in their career. I also want to mention, if there is negotiation on the table, there's less space for negotiation. I'll get to new grads in just a sec. For negotiations, usually the range of negotiations, what's on the table, is going to be smaller. Again, for those same reasons that we can't expect everyone to have a wide variety of skills or experience at this stage in their career. Now, for new grads, that's a great question. We do expect negotiation a little bit more than internships, but again, there's less space for negotiation. And getting into my last point here, for new grads, there's usually some flexibility outside of salary when it comes to negotiation. So a pretty common structure is new grads' salary is going to either be the same across the board or a small variety of wiggle room in between a salary range, but maybe a sign-on bonus could be negotiated. Maybe stock options can be negotiated. There's other elements that are probably more flexible than the base salary. Again, this is not consistent across the board. Some companies have a lot of flexibility for negotiation for both interns and new grads, but from my experience, it's pretty common that there's less flexibility with the salary and more flexibility with other elements of the offer, like a sign-on bonus. Esty, did that answer your question? Awesome. Fantastic. All right, so next I'm going to play a video. It's about an 8-minute video on the 4 main principles of negotiation. Now, this isn't the most thrilling video, but I've watched a few videos on negotiation, and this one I quite like because it is very tangible. And there's 4 things that people can apply right away when it comes to negotiation. So that's why I like this one. But first, I'm going to jump to the question in the chat here from Rishi. What's a good way of measuring a company's flexibility to negotiation? I will get to that in a few slides, but to quickly answer this question, the best thing to do is just to ask. But I'm going to jump into this video now.
As I said before, this Harvard model of negotiation is based on 4 principles. Before we go into these principles, we might want to reflect for a second, why principles? Why not rules? That's quite interesting that the Harvard people choose to go for principles and not for rules, because if you have rules like in laws, chances are very high that that is too linear and too strict, and that people simply think if they follow these kind of rules, everything will be fine. Whereas if you have principles, it is much more organic, it's much more wider, because you have lots of ways how to fulfill those principles. So it is important to realize that the Harvard people choose principle for cooperation and not rules. So that because cooperation needs the freedom and the creativity. So let's go for these 4 principles. If you remember, we talked about, when we talked about the 5 ways of how to deal in a negotiation, that we said, okay, we do have these high interest or low interest in relationship, and we have the high interest or low interest into the issue you want to have. And let's assume for a second you're negotiating with somebody you like and you find very sympathetic. Then it could be that you have a tendency to give in and to accommodate to the other person, so that you have a tendency to play lose-win. Or on the other extreme, you don't like the other person. You might even hate the other person. And then it is possible that you have a tendency to play win-lose because you don't like the person, you don't care for the relationship. So the Harvard people said, okay, in order to avoid these risks, that the quality of relationship interferes with your interest in the issue, you should separate them at all. So the first principle is, and that's easy said and hard to achieve, separate the person from the issue. In real life, that would mean you can negotiate very hard, but you should never be hard on the person, unfriendly and so on and so forth, because it is in your own interest to understand the interests of the other people, and therefore the other partner is not your enemy, it's actually your partner. Otherwise, you don't get what you want. Because otherwise, if you could simply order what you want, you wouldn't negotiate. So the other party is your partner. So the first principle is separate the person from the issue. Easy said, hard actually to live. The second people had a position. They all wanted the pumpkin. Since there was only one pumpkin, it was not possible to give everybody the pumpkin. There was too limited resources. The solution that was not found based on the position and focused on the position, but oriented on the interests of the people. You remember, one wanted the shell for a Halloween mask, the other one wanted the soup, so he needed the meat, and the third person simply the seeds. So the interest on the level of interest, it was possible to find a solution that everybody made happy. So a win-win solution. So the second principles of the Harvard people for cooperation is you should not negotiate position focused, but interest oriented. And later, when we come to the U model, I will show you what kind of questions you have to ask in order to examine the interests of people who are negotiating. The third principle now is that, and that is, if you're actually looking for a trick for win-win, you might find it here. The Harvard people found out that sometimes cooperation is not possible because people who are negotiating are going too fast, too quick into solutions. You hear a problem and you immediately suggest a solution. And if all parties are doing this, chances are very high that you then only negotiate these kind of positions and you end up with a compromise in the best of all worlds. In order to get to the win-win, they suggest now a different approach. They said, based on the interest, you should first develop criteria that must be fulfilled by a solution that you could say yes to. Or in other words, what conditions must a good solution that you could say yes to fulfill? Just to illustrate this principle a little bit, just assume you want to invite somebody out for dinner for a restaurant. And you want to make sure actually that the person you invite to actually likes the restaurant. So you could ask this other person, how would you realize that the restaurant is a good restaurant for you? And then immediately the person would tell you some conditions that must be fulfilled by a good restaurant. For example, a small menu, because a small menu for this person suggests that it is actually fresh cooked. Or it might say a certain quality of light. So, and then you could elaborate a little bit more what kind of light the person means, like candle lights or whatever. Or that there's a certain quality of hygiene, or and so on and so forth, music and so on. So you would get a whole set of criteria that must be fulfilled. And the interesting thing about the criteria is there are much more restaurants than only one restaurant that would fulfill the criteria. So working with criteria kind opens a world of lots of options. And whereas positions, it must be, we go to chez Felix, for example. Yeah. So the third principle is, before creating a solution, agree on certain principles that must be fulfilled by a solution that you could say yes to. And so at that stage of the negotiation, we would have a set of criteria for party A, and we would have a set of criteria for party B. And you will find a win-win solution in that moment where you find one option that fulfills all criteria of party A and all criteria of party B. Win-win. So this is how we get win-win solution. And the fourth principle is, and this is based on the research that people like to choose. So the Harvard people suggest before you actually choose a solution, you should have different options to choose from. So they suggest don't develop only one option that then is the best solution, but maybe 2, 3, or 4 options, and then take the criteria and evaluate your options by the criteria to find the best option. So that, and by doing so, the solution that was found by the parties will be much more sustainable because they also have the sense they have actually had a choice. So just to repeat these 4 principles of the Harvard model of negotiation. It is separate the person from the issue, negotiate not position focused, but interest oriented, develop first criteria that a good solution must fulfill, and develop several options to choose from. So if you follow these 4 principles, chances are very high that, that you actually go for cooperation and that you avoid competition. And in the next chapter, I will then guide you through a pathway through conflicts, how actually to do this and how to apply these kind of principles.
All right, fantastic. So hopefully that was helpful for you. As a recruiter, I find this extremely helpful, and I try to revisit that video, once or twice a year. What I find very helpful is that third principle of understanding the criteria. So not necessarily offering solutions, offering more money, or offering an increase in a relocation, but understand what this person needs to be able to accept a job. What are the criteria and why? And we can usually come up with a mutually beneficial solution. So before you enter some sort of salary negotiation or communication about your offer, you really want to understand your own baseline. What's the minimum amount of money or minimum amount of offerings that you're comfortable with to get to a yes? And you want to understand this for yourself well before you get to the offer stage. Even when you enter an initial interview, it's really helpful to have this number in mind. So if you get signal from the company at the early stages of the interview that they won't be able to meet your baseline, you can back out of the process early. Some great questions in the chat, and I'll get to those in just a moment. So first, getting to your baseline, understanding your worth. Does anyone have any ideas, and please add them in the chat, of how to understand your own worth? How much money do you think you're worth on the market?
I would say maybe considering what your necessities are, and then maybe considering your wants, and just having a baseline of your expenses, and just collaborating all of that together.
That's fantastic. And that's actually over on the other side of my Venn diagram here under your lifestyle. So I'll jump ahead and kind of explain this side of the Venn diagram too. So your lifestyle is the minimum amount of money that you need to live the life that you want. This could include kind of new expenses that you expect. Maybe you're graduating and student loans are going to be on the table. How much money do you need on a day-to-day basis to live the life that you want? And you want there to be some overlap with your worth. How much can you expect to make on the market given your experiences and your education? So some ideas in the chat here for understanding your own worth. SD says experience, skills, and industry, doing market research, visit the Career Center on campus. You can look in to see what other companies pay for similar roles, understand how much value you might add. That's fantastic. And that's actually right on the money on some of my recommendations on how to understand your worth. My favorite source that I tend to use when I'm a candidate is to utilize LinkedIn salaries. You can just plug in the job title and the location, and you can see what other companies are paying for that role. Levels.fyi is also a pretty common tool that people use to understand their own salaries. But I did put a little asterisk there because I found that levels can be inaccurate. It is all self-reported data, and sometimes even data that I hire for is wrong. So I'll look in and see a reported salary for a Netflix internship, and it's actually incorrect. So just keep in mind that levels.fyi is a good starting point, but often can be incorrect. Glassdoor also has salary reported, and then your Career Center can also help you understand how much money you can expect to make on the market. Now over to your lifestyle. This is what we sort of got into verbally just a few moments ago, but what are some ways you can understand or start to understand how much money you might need for the lifestyle that you want? Feel free to drop them in the chat. And I am scanning for questions because I'll get to those in just a moment. All right, we've got budgeting. Tracking your expenses, absolutely. Cost of living calculators, absolutely. All right, these are some great recommendations, and you're right on the money. So understand the cost of living in your area. Do a budget. It's very helpful to track your day-to-day spending to understand how much baseline you actually need, and this can vary by location. Now, I want to get to some of these questions that came up in the chat because they're really good. One is regarding the worth part. We know from research about imposter syndrome, especially when it comes to women. How should we navigate that to find the balance between not underestimating oneself, but also not cross the line? That's a fabulous question. And that's why I highly recommend all candidates, particularly women and marginalized folks, to walk into these salary negotiations, understanding your worth and doing the research ahead of time, being armed with information and armed with data on what you can expect. Again, LinkedIn Salaries is a really great source, and I found it to be pretty accurate. Your Career Center can also give you some information too. So walking in and understanding what you can reasonably expect in the market will ensure that you're not lowballed when you get to those conversations. I also heard some advice that I kind of love, which was look at yourself in the mirror and start saying salary numbers to yourself. When you start to make yourself laugh about how high it is, that should be the number that you target. I kind of love that advice. Sometimes it's not always realistic because our own measuring sticks can be a wide variety, but I do encourage everyone here, particularly marginalized folks, to dream big and know that some of those bigger numbers are attainable. Hopefully that will help combat some of that imposter syndrome. I still struggle with imposter syndrome every day. Edith also asked, does that value include basic necessities or also luxuries? So that's why I put your lifestyle as opposed to your cost of living. Everyone has a different lifestyle and everyone has different needs and expectations of their own life. You could be a pretty frugal person, which means you're going to have a lot more wiggle room when it comes to what types of roles that you can target. If you don't spend a lot of money, you don't need a lot of money, then a lot of different careers are going to be on the table. But if you require a high cost of living, if you love the luxury stuff, if you have a goal of buying a house or you want a Tesla, then you're going to have to get pretty narrow in the types of roles that you target. And you're probably going to have to supplement your education for these particular high paying roles that you're targeting. So there's nothing good or bad, right or wrong on having a variety of needs in your lifestyle, or if you desire luxury things in your life, but it does affect what types of careers could be on the table for you. And that's something that you'll just have to get realistic about and understand how one decision affects the other on this Venn diagram. I'm doing a quick scan for other questions that came up. And I'll just address some that came up a little bit earlier in the presentation while we're here. Sandy asked, what are some common concerns that are ignored by recruiters? I like to say, and speaking for recruiters who, many of my friends are recruiters, myself included, we try not to ignore concerns, but there are some concerns that are just out of scope for what we're able to offer. Sometimes a team simply doesn't have the budget to offer a relocation stipend. And so the candidates that we tend to target have to already be in the location that we're hiring for. So maybe relocation wouldn't be ignored by the recruiter, but it's simply out of scope and it's not something that we can work with when it comes to an offer negotiation. And then, how do you view a new grad negotiating salary? Do recruiters perceive it as arrogance or as confidence? So this goes back to the video that I shared, which is to separate the person from the issue. You want to work with your recruiter and not against your recruiter. Both of you, there is a mutually beneficial solution that you can work together to get to. And if you enter negotiation with that mindset that you can work with them, not against them, that will help the recruiter perceive you in a way that's productive and not in a way that, as SD said, maybe arrogant. Confidence is okay. I do want to encourage everyone to be confident. But confidence without arrogance is the key here. Doesn't hurt the new grad to negotiate, please. We expect it. Okay, I think I got to all the questions, but if I didn't, please let me know and let's continue on to our negotiation practice. First, I just want to say sometimes workshops and role play isn't for everyone. I definitely understand that. But if you do try and if you do give it a good go, it should be able to prepare you in the future. So it's okay to be a little bit silly. It's okay to step out of your comfort zone. And we're not looking for the absolute correct choice here. We're just looking for you to get some practice. So what's going to happen is you will be split into breakout rooms and you'll decide on which role that you'll take. So I'll talk through the roles that we could have, and then I'll talk through the process of how we're going to make this workshop happen. So half of you will be the candidate. You just received an offer for a new grad role as a business development associate. You just finished your undergrad in business and economics and have one internship experience under your belt. You're really excited about this job. This is your #1 company that you want to work for. You're a little nervous about the location. You do want to stay in Chicago. Chicago is where you've lived for the last 4 years. You really like it there. The job is in Palo Alto. Nothing against Palo Alto, you just aren't familiar with it, and you're not really sure what it's like to live there. The recruiter hasn't really been clear through the process if the role can be remote or not, but you do know that the role is hopefully going to be in Palo Alto. In terms of your personal budget, you usually don't spend above your means, but you are excited about loosening your purse strings a little bit post-graduation. So you're usually a pretty good budgeter, but you're like, you know what, I'm about to enter the job market. I'm excited to maybe spend a little bit more on food or go to shows more often, just because you're going to have a job and a more lucrative salary. However, counter to that, student loans are looming. So all this to say, your cost of living is going up. You don't really need to worry about proximity to family or a partner. You tend to make friends pretty easily. Your excitement about Chicago is more or less because it's what's familiar. All right, and then the other half of you are recruiters. So you're ready to extend an offer to a candidate that both you and the hiring manager are really excited about. You're like, wow, this is a perfect fit. You do have a few alternate candidates identified, but they're not as strong as your first choice candidate. However, your first alternate does have a competing deadline. So if you need to move on this alternate candidate, you need to move fast. All this to say, you're really hoping that your #1 candidate, the person you're about to negotiate with, you really hope that they either accept or decline the offer quickly so that you can make a quick decision about the other candidates that you have in the pipeline. You will have a specific salary range that you can work with. I will be sending those to you momentarily. And you do know that the location is a sticking point for your candidate, but unfortunately, your manager just let you know that relocation is going to be a requirement for the position. All right, so here's what's going to happen. You will be split into groups of 4. 2 people will act as the candidate and 2 people will act as the recruiter. Obviously, it won't be a perfect spread, but we want to make sure that folks can partner with each other and talk about their strategy as the candidate. Same thing for the recruiter. We don't want to put anyone on the spot here, and it's nice to have another person to bounce your ideas off of. Take a few minutes to develop your strategy. Candidate, maybe do a little external research to understand your own baseline, some numbers that you should walk in with. And then the recruiter, once we send you into the breakout rooms, let me know that you're the recruiter and I will share the salary range and other elements with you through the sort of private chat here in Zoom. Then I'd like the 4 of you to take about 10 minutes to negotiate the offer. Keep in mind the principles covered in the video, and you can ping me if any questions come up. Again, no pressure to come up with a perfect solution, but I'm curious to hear how the conversation goes and if there's any creative solutions to the offer. So what we'll do next is we'll get you into your breakout rooms of 4. I'll drop into each room and ask who decided to be the candidates and who decided to be the recruiter. And for the recruiters, I will private chat you with the details of the offer. Does that sound good to everybody? Jessica, does that sound good to you?
Yep. Rooms have already been created, so I'm going to open them up. All right. So there's, oh, nice. There's 4 rooms. Okay. And Rebecca, Mayuri, I don't know if either of you can hear me, but are you having trouble joining the breakout rooms, or are you unable to join the breakout rooms at this time? Hey, Layne, how's it going?
Okay. Got them the details. Maybe
Okay.
give them not the full 10 minutes because guess what? I talk a lot. Maybe
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about
5
that.
minutes.
Okay. Yeah, it's currently at like 7 minutes, so 3 minutes have passed by.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I can give a 2-minute warning.
Perfect. And actually, I think I might, I'm gonna bump the personality assessment to the end of the presentation, and maybe it's something they can do on their own. Do you know if we send the slides out to everybody after?
Yes, we can send it out.
Okay, perfect. Cool.
How are they doing in there?
Some better than others.
I'm curious to see their recruiter role play.
I know. I think it's generally just good to kind of put yourself in anyone else's shoes. I'm curious to see like who needs more information. Sometimes people are really good with working with the ambiguity and like kind of coming up with stuff. Sometimes people need detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And close all rooms.
All right. All right, looks like everyone's coming back in. Welcome, welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed being a recruiter for 10 minutes. Fabulous. Okay, it looks like almost everyone is back in. Of course, I'm overly verbose and we are running short on time, but I'd love to hear in the chat, maybe one or two folks can share if any interesting solutions came up or if anyone got to an offer agreement.
I'd like to share something that I found insightful.
Yeah.
So I was in a room with Lee, and one thing that really struck my interest is when she played as a recruiter, someone mentioned a desired salary of 80K, and then she mentioned that they wouldn't be able to offer that. However, they could do a base salary, and then I think it was a sign-on bonus. Personally, for me, I've never had a salary-based job. I've had per hour jobs, and so I didn't really know how salary was broken down. So that was very insightful for me. And it just made me want to do more research on, sign-on bonuses and other offers other than base salary pay.
Exactly. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that that was helpful to you. So many offers aren't just the base salary, even though the base salary is really important, but you can talk sign-on bonuses, you can talk education stipends, relocation, stock options. Stock options are really common right now, especially in tech. Tech companies don't have a lot of cash. So they're offering large stock options for folks instead of salaries. So there's a lot to consider. If we do have time at the end, which I don't think we will, I'd love to hear more stories, but that's fantastic. And yes, I'll drop in. Here's what was sent to the recruiters. One sec. Here's my little sheet. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thanks for sharing. All right, we are going to jump ahead to advice on timing, because this is really important and pertinent right now. We're noticing a lot of competition right now when it comes to timing of offers, and so I'd like to address it. Please feel free to jump in the chat if you've been here before. I found this on Reddit and some other job sites. How to ask for an extension to my internship offer, how to ask for an extension on the deadline, how do I politely decline an offer to extend an internship? There's all of these questions on communicating, especially when it comes to deadlines. A question about sign-on bonuses. Do you receive sign-ons immediately or at the first year of the job? It does depend on the company. I've seen it. Sometimes you get the sign-on right away, and sometimes you have to be employed for 1 year to be able to get it. So that's a great question for your recruiter. But if you're thinking about how to manage the timing of an offer, let's talk about it. So you might be in a situation where you have multiple offers, or you get an offer from company A before you're done with the interview process for company B. And unfortunately, company B is the company you really want to work for. So through a typical university recruiting process, sometimes you get into these really sticky timing situations. Company A is breathing down your neck, trying to get you accept or decline, but you want to spend more time getting through the interview process with company B, and it can just get really, really messy. There's some context here why companies might give you a tight turnaround time. Sometimes they have a large volume of roles to fill. Some university recruiting programs look after thousands of interns, and they're trying to get those roles filled quickly. They also might have alternate candidates lined up who also have deadlines that are pertinent. Finally, you're really good and we want you. So we want to get you to sign that offer so that we can make sure that you're secure. So there's a lot of reasons why a company might be putting pressure on you to make a decision about signing your offer. Here's how to potentially mitigate it. Now, one thing I do want to make clear is it's a tough situation for everyone, and there's no one solution to this problem. I do recommend always to be transparent with your recruiter, even before you get the offer. Let them know if you are interviewing for a few different places. Maybe you're in the first interview with a recruiter. Tell them that you're actively interviewing for a few other places. It can help them understand that maybe we will get to a sticky timing situation in the future, and maybe you can plan for it proactively. Take an active role in your interview schedule. If you can, ask for interviews to kind of line up with each other for the 2 different companies that you're working with. You can also ask your recruiter if you can get an interview early or maybe delay an interview for a few days. Try to talk to your recruiter to understand how long the interview process actually is end to end. How many interviews can you expect? All this information will help you better make a decision on how everything will play out and what you can expect from a timing perspective at the end of the process. Now, of course, there's variations. Not every company will be in a position to give you all of this information. Not every company has flexibility in their interview timing, and maybe you can't push it forward or you can't delay. That's okay, but it's always good to ask. You can use your speed of response as a negotiation tactic. You can say, hey, if you bump up my sign-on bonus by $5,000, then I can sign today. That could work. Companies will also sometimes use speed of response as a negotiation tactic. Sometimes companies will proactively offer a higher sign-on bonus if you sign your offer early. So this can be something you can pull out. Again, it's not going to work 100% of the time, but it's a helpful tool to keep in your arsenal. I also want to say, be prepared for no. I've had to say no to candidates before, and no one loves it. I personally don't love it. But sometimes we've extended as much as we can, and we really need that offer to get filled, or we're about to lose our alternate candidate. And we have to tell you, no, you have to sign by X date that we already agreed upon. So just be prepared. That might be an answer that you're going to receive. So you need to come up with some contingency plans for those situations. And then you can always ask for an extension to an offer decision deadline. There's a few ways that you can do it. Always respond with enthusiasm, say that you are excited for the offer, but give them some reasons why you need a little bit more time to accept or decline. There's also some really handy templates out there. I've hyperlinked this one. It's from MIT. They provide a template to their students to ask for an extension. Hey, makes it a little bit easier for you to use a template. Again, it might not work. You might get a no, but these are all different tactics that you can use to help mitigate some of these sticky situations. Some questions came up in the chat. Does it make sense sharing pending offer deadlines with your top choice company if you aren't necessarily planning on accepting the offer with the deadline? Rishi, this is a tough one. It might make sense if accepting is on the table in any sort of contingency plan, then it is worth mentioning. It also, just between you and me, it's helpful for you if a company knows that you're desired by other companies. It's kind of nice. It's kind of a feather in your cap. So it could be worth mentioning that you have an offer from another company. But again, like we said earlier about confidence versus arrogance, you can say it with confidence, but say it in a way that, is conducive to a mutually beneficial agreement at the end of the process. You can say it in a way that doesn't sound arrogant, and all of you are so lovely. I don't think that's going to be a problem for any of you. All right, so some post-offer tips just very quickly. I know we're at time, but establish regular check-ins with your hiring manager, especially if there's a long runway between your offer and your start date. use that time to prepare for not only your role, but the corporate world. So ask what types of tools the technology your team uses and see if you can get a jump start on that. And then I also want to remind you, all work so hard, and just any interview process is a job unto itself. So please take some time to relax, sign the offer, get some R&R, get some downtime. If you can travel, do it. If you can't travel, do a little staycation. It is definitely worth your time. With that, unfortunately, I'm glad we were able to get to questions throughout the presentation, because I am going to get kicked out of my conference room. But feel free to add me on LinkedIn and send any questions my way. I want to make sure I address them for all of you. But this was such a pleasure. It was so nice to meet all of you, and I want to say thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining this session. A special shout out to Layne. Thank you for putting all of this together and sharing such great tips. We're going to go ahead and announce the winner of today's session to get their resume reviewed by one of our talent board members. And so the winner is Rishi Gupta. So congratulations, and we will connect with you through email this week. And look out for emails from Talent Board to register for our last session this Thursday, July 28th, on making the most of your internship, and it's going to be hosted by MongoDB. See you all, and best of luck with negotiating all of your offers. Have a good one. Bye.